Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Last week I never spoke a word to Phyllis because I didn't want to interrupt her. Now, you can see the way the time has went, and there's not much time left, but I tell you, all I'm here to do is to tell you about the change in my life. And don't be getting up, by the way. But really here, I'm the youngest and the best looking out of six. I'll condense my testimony. And we were reared on a farm. And my dad's the old stock. He's still alive. He's 88 the other day. And his thought was there was no free ticket. When you were small, you carried a small bucket or you did the wee chores. And when we got a bit bigger, well, the job got a bit bigger too. And that's the way it was. But there was a thing in our house that we were compulsory. You had to go to church. Sunday morning you had to go. There was no way out of it. And we would have went, and we used to say, I think it was an hour well wasted in the week. And that was really me. And then we got on into our teens, and we wriggled out of going. We would have delayed the process on a Sunday morning, the feeding the cattle or whatever. And my dad wouldn't have went through the door of a church 1 second after the whistle had blew, for he would have said that was height of ignorance. And he wouldn't have went. And then that was how me and my brother wriggled out of going. We wriggled out of going to church, coming in late. And he'd have just said, "Ma, Jean, come on, we'll go on." But we still would have went. If there had been a funeral in the neighbour, you still would have went. Births and that type of thing. And if I went once in a year, I treated church or God or the minister like a bit like insuring the car once a year, and that was you covered. Stupidness. But you see, there's a verse in the Bible for me. It says that there is a way that seemeth right, and it seemed okay to me. If there was such a thing as heaven, why would he not let me in? And if there was a place called hell, why would he send me there? Sure, I hadn't murdered nobody. I hadn't done nothing really bad. And that was me. But as Phyllis has told you, and we met and we're going through and we got married. And I think she's the luckiest woman in Ireland, and I tell her every day. But what do you hear? It wasn't until the boys come. And the boys come the way they were. And somebody telling me, my minister came in and he told me that God loved me. It was only God's grace stopped me putting my fist down his throat. Because the problems I had could only roll on the floor. What did he know about me or the real life? And then you see, whenever Ford come along, I believe Ford was just a bit of good luck. Things were starting to go our way. And then whenever Wensley was born, the same minister came in and he told me that God loved me. I told him I didn't want to know. Didn't want to know. And but you know this, the day that Wensley was born, Phyllis cried that day. And then she looked at me and she looked up at the big doctor and she says, "Doctor, he'll be great company for Thomas." I didn't say it like that. That melted my heart. And I would have taken you to see the two of them. We used to stuff their clothes with wee prickly, squeaky toys. And whenever they were rolling about on the floor, they were squeaking, squawking, quacking, you name it, they were doing. But they loved just their own company. And you know this? Whenever Thomas died, you see, I had no time for God. I didn't want to know. My purpose was to look after my family. But then whenever God come and took Thomas away, I knew I was cornered. And tell me this, you're here tonight, and have you ever really been cornered? I don't know anything about you. And if you think that I've come to Kilkeel to talk you into being saved, you've got it all wrong. I'm only here to point you to the one who can. If I could talk you into being saved, somebody smarter than me could talk you out of it. I haven't a brain in my head. And but that was how God spoke to me. And I had a dream the day Thomas was buried that night. And the dream was that it was coming back. Death was coming back. And I wakened in the middle of the night in the sweat, and it was November. And the sweat was sitting on my chest. He said, Phyllis, get up. It's coming back. And she calmed me down. She says, look, you've had a nightmare. No, he said, I've seen it. I've seen the grave opened again. I've seen the coffin. I've seen another coffin. It's coming back. And it's coming for me. And I got up and I drank coffee and I smoked till I could wait no longer. And I found a man that used to teach me in high school. And I was 30 at the time. And I phoned a man, and you called him Tom Somerville. His nickname was Big Sarge. And I rang him and I told him about Thomas. I told him that Wensley was in the hospital. I told him about my dream. And down the phone, he says, you know, big fella, says he, God's trying to speak to you. He says, what do you mean? He says, I knew you wouldn't understand. He says, but says he, I'll come in to hospital. I'll come in to Craigavon today and see you. And sure enough, that day about 12 o'clock, Big Tom come through the door. And he stayed a while, and he talked to him for a while. And then he was leaving. He said, look, do you mind if I pray with you? He said, Tom, and God, it'll be great. And he prayed, and then he was going out through the door. He says, have you two been up here all morning? I say, Tom, we have. He says, sure, come on out with me to my house. I'll get you out of here for half an hour. I'll get you a cup of tea, and then I'll bring you back. I never was in his house in my life. I went into his house, and he sent Jean into the kitchen to make a cup of tea, and we were sitting on the sofa, and he came forward to me, and he's a real big man. You think he's built in hard wolves, to tell you the truth. But a real big man, and he says, you know, you're big fellas in heaven. Oh, he says, say, Tom, certainly, man, dear, he's in heaven. Say, you know, he never said a bad word. Say, he never even had a bad thought. And he said to me, he says, well, says he, Hartford, if you ever want to meet him again, you know, you need to be saved. And he says, well, Tom, I know that. I've heard that before. He says, did you ever think about it? I said, hey, Tom, I'll be honest with you. It never entered my head. He said, you know, you should think about it. You know, you could get saved today. I said, what do you mean? Well, he says, you know, all it is a moment in time of asking Jesus to come into your heart. And the Bible promises that he'll come in, he'll save you, and he'll change you. I said, Tom, that's powerful. Say, Tom, this, could you guarantee that I'll meet my son again? And ladies and gentlemen, it was a smile on Tom's face that convinced me he was right. He all lit up and he says, it's 100% guarantee. He says, hey, Tom, I tell you to do, talk no more. I want this Jesus business that you talk about in my heart. And there and then, on my knees in Tom's wee living room, I asked Jesus to come into my heart. And Tom's real jokey big man. He clapped his hands. He says, praise the Lord, bro. You're a Christian now. You're a brother of mine. And I looked up on him. He said, what? What? That's it? I said, but are you taking a mickey? Are you making a fool out of me? Now, I've buried my son the day before. Phyllis is there and she's crying. I'm crying. And I looked up. I said, you're making a fool out of me? I said, no. I said, I feel no different. He says, you want to see it through your feelings. And then he lifted up the Bible after we mantelpiece and he read it. And it was Ephesians 2 and verse 8. It says, for by grace are you saved through faith. He says, what you want to do is, whenever you go home, you write in feelings. For by grace are you saved through feelings. He says, that's not right. He says, if you're feeling good today, you think you're saved. And then if you're not feeling good tomorrow, you think you're not saved. He says, that's Irish. That's nonsense. He says, right, you've got me on that one. Well, he said, now, wait a minute. You see the church where we go to, say, look, there's the real good people in Donnaclona, and then there's the list that comes in every year. I don't know why you woke the list in here or not, but I hated it. And there was the Armstrongs, there was the Arnolds, and what all they paid in, and then there was the Carsons, the Torquenton, and then there's the big shots, was the Wilsons, that paid in thousands. I said, wait a minute, Tom, you have to do something to her. He says, not at all. He says, it's the gift of God. Do you know what a gift is? Well, I said, now, Tom, I have a brave idea. He says, if you had to give me one penny for what God has given you today, it would be no gift. It would be an exchange. And I left Tom's house that day, and we went back to Craigavon Hospital and sat till late with Wensley. And then we come home, and Phyllis got the box of photographs out, and me and her just went down to bed and cried ourselves stupid. And do you know this? If the Lord had come through the bedroom door and pointed the finger straight at me and said, "You see what you done today? That was a load of nonsense. Don't forget it. Forget about it," I wouldn't have believed him, for I knew I was changed. If you ask Jesus into your heart, you'll know you're changed. And if you have to doubt it, there's something wrong. Well, I think I'm saved. Not at all. That's stupidness. You couldn't have Jesus in your heart and him not let you know. Do you know this? 9 days later, standing in the moor, looking into Mother Earth, I knew my dream. It was real. God warned me. Do you know this? I've come here tonight to Kilkeel to warn you too. Do you know this? Last Sunday night, a friend that I just know, at 10 minutes to 6, a car hit him on the side and broke his neck, and he went out into eternity. A second earlier or a second later, Jimmy Boyd would still be here. Tomorrow is promised to no one. Where will you be tomorrow? Maybe you don't have Christ as in your heart. I don't know. That's not my business. But don't say Hartford Arnold didn't warn you. That's plan A. Get saved now. There's a plan B, you know. Change when you die. But it doesn't work. And then there's a plan C, a wee while after you die. But it's too late. You see, the rich man, it says in hell, he lift up his eyes, because whenever you're in rock bottom, there's only one way you can look, and that's up. And while he had breath in his body, he was a greedy, selfish pig. He was all a my and a me man. And you know this, now that he's dead, it didn't change him one bit. Because his first request was for what? Still himself. Send Lazarus to dip his finger in water to cool my tongue. You know when he changed? When God spoke to him. For God said, "Remember, son, in thy lifetime." And that's when he changed. But he left it too late. He said, send them to my brother's house, lest they also come into this place. That was some change. But it's too late. Today in the early morning news, I heard in England that there was 91 churches in England going to pray for the teacher that was killed. They're a lifetime too late. You need Jesus in your heart now while you have breath. But you know why? Because the Bible says in Luke 16 that there's a gulf fixed that can't be changed. Don't you leave it too late. Go for plan A, and that's tonight. Ask Jesus into your heart. You've been super people to listen to, talk to. Thanks a million.